welcome to this week's Preps Preview. I'm Aren alongside Scott Richey. Finally got a first week in the books, so I actually have some football to talk about. And you know, it's hard to overreact to week one because it's only one game, and but we're going to try to break down three different things, leading with one big surprise that we saw from week one. Scott, what'd you have? What stood out to you?
Really, a couple teams in the Apollo, stood out. In the preseason edition of this, I kind of wondered just how good the Apollo was going to be this year, and two teams definitely stood out in week one. I think none more so than Mattoon. They got a good win, 36-33 over Troy Triad, who it's not a pushover team, and they did it through the air. And I think we all knew Jared Pilson at quarterback, coming back after a really good junior year, was going to be the guy for the Green Wave. He proved it, 18 of 25 for 307 yards and 4 touchdowns. And he did a lot of, most of that actually, throwing to Malik Joyner, 9 receptions for 217 yards and 2 of those scores. So I think they kind of, put a little worry into the rest of the Apollo. You're going to have to cover Malik, the whole season. And if you don't, I think Pilson, he's just as good with his feet, as he is with his arm. So they're going to be definitely maybe a team to watch, as far as some of our area teams getting into the playoffs this year. And just another short note, Charleston, I thought they were really going to be in trouble when Josh Casley decided to move back to the Chicago area with his mom. But Miles Decker set a school record with 41 carries last week in their win over Rantoul, and he scored 3 touchdowns and also rushed for 268 yards. Now, granted, Rantoul has been down, in the Corn Belt for a few years now, but it's a good way for Charleston to start.
A big surprise for me week one out of the OCON was Monticello A&M. I felt like Monticello would be a good team, someone that a lot of the the OCON should watch out for. But the way that they beat A&M was 34-0. That kind of took me back of how much of a beatdown it was. They lost Ryan Donahue, who carried 200 times for that offense. Really relied on him. Parker Trice is not there either, who wasn't a big part of it, but is serviceable, had 1,000 yards. So definitely a good quarterback. So, but you're losing 2 big pieces, especially with Ryan Donahue. And Andrew Bailey rushes for 100 yards, and Dylan Nisley. And looking at Nisley, he's kind of the complete opposite of what Donahue was. I saw him for wrestling last year. I think he wrestled 145. So a smaller, much faster, shiftier running back than what Ryan Donahue was, who's more of a power back. And Andrew Bailey kind of filled that role a little bit, the fullback for them. So they kind of have a little bit more diversity now, and maybe Monticello doesn't drop off even with those losses. So I don't think A&M is nearly as bad as what that score makes it out to be. But for me, watching, seeing that score from Monticello really surprised me, and maybe they're just as good as maybe they were last year.
I was just a little surprised that A&M had such trouble moving the ball. I made it out to their practice, before the season started, and they're definitely a different offense, loading the backfield. But I thought with who they had back there with Zach Ballinger and Ryan Hauser and Jordan Bacalzi, I thought offensively running behind that giant line that they'd be able to get things going, and maybe it's just going to take a little bit longer.
Yeah, and maybe it's just a lot of coaches said with the IHSA restricted summer that maybe some of these coaches who are coming in for the first time, trying to get them to run an offense, it might take a little bit longer, and maybe that's all it was. That A&M. Obviously, Coley Welter's been at Monticello for a while, and they know what to expect. And having a first-time coach, maybe that's a product of that first week as well. So we'll see. Scott, who'd you, out of all the games, it was more of a reassurance, like, okay, that's who we kind of thought this team was?
Really, what stood out to me the most was Argenta. I think maybe just because of how they beat Clinton. It was 56-19 win for the Bombers, and they scored all 56 of those points in the first half. Yeah. And that's not an easy thing to do. But what helped them, they had just monster plays. Austin Wins-Kunis had 2 rushes for the game, and he had 127 yards, and both of those were for touchdowns. And then Cameron Hupp only rushed 6 times for 163 yards, and he scored 3 times. They just broke monster plays, and it was just, I think, Clinton is still trying to, build into something, and so maybe that wasn't totally, it wasn't all Argenta, but it was a lot of Argenta, and I think, as the season progresses, they get in, some games against the, tougher opponents. Monticello, obviously coming up here real shortly, and then Maroa a little bit later in the season. that'll be their test to see if they can try and duplicate some of what they did against Clinton.
For me, the team that really didn't surprise this week, it took 5 days, but Arthur Leamington Atwood Hammond had a huge game. They scored 22 points, I believe, before they postponed it until Tuesday, and then they wrapped that up pretty nicely. But Tyler Schuring, had 3 touchdowns, had 2 rushing, 1 passing. Jordan Fegan had 3 touchdowns, and he had a kick return, I believe a reception touchdown, and 1 rushing. And for that team, they're just. Hoopeston, to be fair, I think they folded in the middle last year. They don't have a whole lot of players. Not a great team, but Arthur just rolled over them the way that a good team should. So the amount of options that they have on offense, and I think Arthur, they did what they were supposed to do. They really didn't surprise. They're just as good as I kind of expected them to be out of the gate.
Okay, so with week 2 starting, there's some pretty interesting matchups. What I'm kind of looking for is another good game from MacArthur. They opened the season with a win over Jerseyville this time, because after last year where they gave away a game at home, and that really set the tone for a not great year for the Generals. So you got to think that getting a win on the road against Jerseyville, pretty solid team again. That's going to give them a little bit of a push, but they have to keep that up this week against Centennial. And MacArthur's got Normal West in week 3, and I'm sure they'd much rather be 2-0 heading into that instead of making a road game at Normal West a must-win so early in the season. But against Champaign Centennial, they're coming off one of their own against Eisenhower. Pretty easy 28-7 victory. What MacArthur's going to have to look for is Jimmy Fitzgerald at quarterback for Centennial. He's got offers from Illinois and Yale so far, so they know they're going to be going against a good quarterback. And Coach Spates, has said that his defense, he thinks, is going to be the strength of his team, which is kind of saying something with the weapons they have offensively. So they're going to have to really put some pressure on the quarterback, and if you disrupt his game, I think that's kind of going to be a key to beating Centennial.
And if you kind of look at the schedule, both Normal West, Normal Community, both looked really good week 1, and the Danville Bloomington game was 55-50 Bloomington. So obviously those teams can score points. So that leaves, kind of those 4 other Big 12 games. Kind of puts a little bit of pressure to win this game against Centennial. I saw St. Theresa last week play Meridian. Now they're going to play Maroa. So a complete shift from, kind of the bottom of the Oka to the top. And I'm really interested to see what St. Theresa is capable of going from, a team like that to a team like Maroa. They ran the ball well. Christian Williams had a really nice run. It was kind of a play-action pass that was broke down. That he has a lot of big play potential, and they had a couple passes that Christian looked pretty good with his arm in week 1. The defense looked really good, so it'll be interesting to see how all those kind of factor into it, playing a team like Maroa, and maybe where some of those strengths are, and maybe where they have to build up. Because I think St. Theresa may not be in that top tier of the Oka just yet, but they're definitely much better than they were last year. And I think this week, playing Maroa will be able to show kind of maybe a little bit more where they fall in the Oka.
Okay, and to kind of finish up, for this week, we'll get our top 5s. And starting at number 5, mine's going to look very similar to our preseason edition. I do have one change, but I imagine it'll change back maybe next week. But number 5 is going to stay the same. That's Nokomis. They got pretty easy 52-14 win over Trenton Westland. And I think Nokomis, dropping down a class to 2A, that they're going to be a pretty good team to reckon with, just because they have some experienced players on offense. Just their strength of schedule, I think, is going to hurt them. They don't play a lot of teams that are going to be playing in the playoffs, so they have to make the most of what they can from games against like Alden Marquette, which is later in the season. At 4, this is the only change, because last week I had Cerro Gordo, but meant at 4, and even after crushing Clinton, I have Argenta at 4, and I said last week 4 and 3 were going to be interchangeable, and right now, Argenta did what they were supposed to do. They, just blew up all over Clinton, and I moved, Cerro Gordo to 3, and only because, they beat Lena Winslow on Saturday, the hottest day of the year. Yeah. It was, just nasty out, and
feel sorry for Justin.
Yeah, Justin was there, just sweated through, a long football game, and also had a pretty lengthy, injury, break as well. But beating Lena Winslow, one of the top teams the last decade from the northern part of the state, it's a huge win for Cerro Gordo. And Steve Isbell did Steve Isbell-like things on the ground. So they also they proved something, because there's a little question mark how they're going to play with a brand new offensive line, and clearly things are going pretty well for them. Number 2, Casey Westfield stays the same for me. They got in kind of a shootout last week with Olney, but they had good game from Nico Sapina at quarterback. He had a rushing and a passing touchdown. Austin Glidewell scored twice on the ground. And then Zach Murphy scored on an interception and a punt return. So they did a little bit of everything, and they needed to against Olney. And then number 1, probably going to be my number 1 all year, unless just something catastrophic happens. But Merle Forsyth, shutout over Shelbyville. Jack Hockaday, 278 passing, 4 touchdowns. Pretty much sums them up. So
my top 5 is exactly the same. I do have one change like you. I have Arthur Leamington at 5 and CGB at 4 again. I said this before, I don't know how CGB dropped after beating Lena Winslow in the AP poll, but they did. I know a lot of people from up north are saying, maybe it's not the same Lena Winslow team. Well, it's not the same Cerro Gordo team either. I think anytime you get a win over someone like that, that's very impressive. They didn't have, CGB didn't have their entire line coming back, and they still were able to prove that they could move the ball. The defense did a pretty good job holding Lena Winslow and that offense down quite a bit too. And I've already talked about, Arthur have had a great year. So Arthur at 5, CGB at 4. I moved Argenta down to 3, mostly because of what Casey did last week. But Argenta, we talked about how really all facets of their game, they played really well that first week. And Casey, they got in a shootout last year with Olney, and they still, went through undefeated in the regular season and went on. So I think, I was a little skeptical, how is that all going to play out with, so many seniors leaving that team, and they did just fine. So I'm moving them up to 2 this week, and they should have a pretty easy time going through the rest of the Little Illini. And then Moreau at number 1. And, like you said, unless something happens, I think there's either the Argenta game and then the Tolono game, and we'll kind of see how those go. But right now, Moreau just looks like the best team in the area right now. So thanks for watching. Make sure to go to Press Pick'em. You guys can try to. I'm gonna brag. I did the best of everybody this week, so you can try to beat me. You probably won't, but we'll see how it goes. And St. Theresa baseball coach Jim Stewart.
He's pretty much unstoppable.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
so really, yeah. So gun for him. See if you can beat him this week. But go check out Press Pick'em, and we'll see you out there.